BBC's Ros Atkins there. Well, before we close this hour, let's go back to live pictures from Gaza. Gaza's health ministry said that at least 493 Palestinians have been killed, and meanwhile more than 700 people have been killed in Israel since Saturday. I'm Regina Vaidyanathan. Maryam's up next. Stay with us on the BBC.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The Israeli military deploys dozens of tanks towards Gaza and calls up 100,000 reservists as prospects of a ground offensive mount. It's thought more than 700 Israelis have been killed. 260 were at a music festival which came under attack from Hamas. Israeli officials have described Saturday's attacks as their 9/11. 100 Israelis have reportedly been taken hostage and moved to Gaza.
Don't hurt little children, don't hurt women. If you want me instead, I'm willing to come.
This is the scene live in Gaza where nearly 500 Palestinians have been killed in airstrikes. Israel's Prime Minister warns of a long war ahead. Hello and welcome to BBC News. I'm Maryam Moshiri. The Israeli military has said its fighter jets, helicopters and artillery have struck over 500 targets overnight in Gaza. The death toll since Hamas launched its attacks on Saturday has now reached 1,700 have been killed in Israel, including 260 at a music festival. And nearly 500 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza after Israel launched retaliatory airstrikes. Well, the Israeli military says the attacks launched on Hamas on Saturday are like the 2001 terrorist attacks on the United States. Well, as always, more on this story on the BBC's website. But for now, around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're live with me, Maryam Moshiri, watching BBC News. Well, let's bring you a little bit more now on what is happening in terms of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. Let's cross live now to New York, and CBS News correspondent Naomi Rockham is there for us. So Naomi, first of all, let me ask you this. What has been the US reaction over these events? Okay, Rushdie, it's good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for that. You can hear in the background as I speak to Rushdie, you could hear explosions going off. And let's just take very briefly the live shot of the Gaza skyline. You can see there the plumes of smoke rising in the background. The missile strikes that Rushdie was explaining to us about are still continuing. And we've also heard actually from the IDF spokesperson who said that Hamas gunmen are still in Israeli civilian communities. So the fight is still ongoing on the other side of the border with Gaza in southern Israel. But so far we know that over 1,200 people have been killed in this fighting between the two sides. I'm back in just a few minutes with plenty more on BBC News. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere. This is BBC News, the latest headlines. The Israeli military deploys dozens of tanks towards Gaza and calls up 100,000 reservists as prospects of a ground offensive in Gaza mount. It's thought more than 700 Israelis have been killed. 260 were at a music festival which came under attack from Hamas. Israeli officials have described Saturday's attacks as their 9/11. 100 Israelis have reportedly been taken hostage and moved to Gaza.
Don't hurt little children, don't hurt women. If you want me instead, I'm willing to come.
And this is the scene live in Gaza where nearly 500 Palestinians have been killed in airstrikes. Israel's Prime Minister warns of a long war ahead. The Israeli military has said its fighter jets, helicopters and artillery have struck over 500 targets overnight in Gaza. Well, let's take a look at what's happening in Gaza right now. And you can see there the smoke in the background. There have been missiles hitting Gaza City pretty regularly particularly overnight and this morning. Nearly 500 people have been killed in airstrikes, according to the Palestinian Health Authority. Militants from the Palestinian group Hamas remain inside Israel, apparently, where fighting is ongoing at least 7 locations there, just 2 days after the first mass assault happened on Saturday. Well, meanwhile, more than 700 Israelis have been killed and as many as 100 Israeli hostages could have been taken into Gaza by militants. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. You're live with me, Maryam Moshiri. You're watching BBC News. Let's go back to our top story now. And Iran has denied that the country played any part in the Hamas attack on Israel, which it said represented a major Israeli security failure. The Wall Street Journal has reported that the Iranians helped organise the assault by Hamas. Earlier, Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi publicly backed the Hamas militants and called on other Muslim countries to join the fight. Well, let's talk now to BBC Persian's Bahman Galbasi. And Bahman, tell me first of all, there are conflicting stories here. On the one hand, we're hearing from the Hamas leadership that Iran did help Hamas. On the other hand, Iran's come out today and said, we had nothing to do with this. OK, Bahman, thank you very much indeed for that. Good to talk to you, Bahman, from the BBC Persian service. Let's just bring you some live pictures now coming into us from Gaza City. I want to just update you on all the latest lines that we have. This live scene we've been watching for a while now, and this is a destroyed building. The Israeli Defense Force has been targeting what it calls Hamas bases around Gaza City. But of course, Gaza City is a very, very tightly packed area with 2 million Palestinians living in a very small area. The Israeli military says that it has targeted, I think it's around 1,000 different targets within the, even perhaps more over the last day or so. Just overnight, 500 targets were hit in Gaza, and we saw the city skyline lighting up as the missiles pounded the city below. What we're hearing so far is that 700 Israelis have been killed in these attacks. We're hearing also a number of those were soldiers. I think the number was 73 were confirmed to be Israeli soldiers. In terms of Palestinians, we're hearing that over 400 Palestinians have now died in these attacks by the Israeli Defense Force. We will, of course, bring you much more on this developing story throughout the morning here on BBC News. I'm back in just a few minutes' time. Stay with us on the BBC. Live from London, this is BBC News. Following the Hamas attack, it's thought more than 700 Israelis have been killed, 260 at a music festival. Israeli officials describe Saturday's attacks as their 9/11. 100 Israelis have reportedly been taken hostage and moved to Gaza.
Don't hurt little children, don't hurt women. If you want me instead, I'm willing to come.
This is the scene live in Gaza, where nearly 500 Palestinians have been killed in airstrikes. Israel's Prime Minister warns of a long war ahead. Showing its support, the US says it's moving warships closer to Israel. Hello, I'm Maryam Moshiri. Welcome to BBC News. The Israeli military has said its fighter jets, helicopters and artillery have struck over 500 targets overnight in Gaza. The death toll since Hamas launched its attacks on Saturday has now reached 1,200. 700 of those have been killed in Israel, including 260 at a music festival. Reuters reports that this includes 73 soldiers, that's according to the Israeli military. And more than 500 have been killed in Gaza after Israel launched retaliatory airstrikes. Well, the Israeli military says the attacks launched by Hamas on Saturday are like the 2001 terrorist attacks on the United States. This is our 9/11, a spokesman said. Iran has said in the last hour it's played no part in the attack by Hamas. A foreign ministry spokesman said the Palestinians had the capacity to defend their nation without any help from Tehran, which has called for an emergency meeting of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. Well, let's take you live now to see the wider picture in Gaza City. We heard there from our correspondent Rushdie, and this is what we're seeing now live in Gaza City. You can see on the left-hand side of the screen where the city meets the sea. Last night we saw the harbour on fire, various boats within the harbour on fire. But what we're hearing now from the Israeli Defence Force is that they have targeted Hamas targets, they say, within Gaza City, and overnight alone they have managed to hit 500 different Hamas targets. Now, the Israeli Defence Forces spokesman today has said the military has now regained control of all communities near the Gaza border, but isolated clashes are going on with active Palestinian gunmen. If you remember, the Israeli Defence Forces did say earlier that there are still potentially Palestinian gunmen in the Israeli territory by the Gaza border. And now we know that there are 7 or 8 places inside Israeli territory that are being targeted. This is a picture of a building that has been destroyed by the IDS. Now, around 100 hostages have been taken from Israel into Gaza. It's believed many of them have been taken into Gaza by Hamas. Many of them were taken from villages and towns close to the Gaza border in southern Israel. I want to talk now to Michal Cohen-Seiji, who is a mother-in-law, whose mother-in-law, Ada, is one of those who are missing. Michal, I'm so grateful to you for taking the time to speak to us here on BBC News. I know it's a really, really tough time. Just tell me a little bit about what you know about what happened to your mother-in-law, Ada. Michal, I'm so grateful to you for coming on to BBC News and telling us the story of Ada, and I wish you honestly all the very best. And I really hope that you get her back safe, sound and completely healthy. Thank you once again for taking the time to talk to us, Michal. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, as you heard there, some very, very difficult stories to hear. These were people who were completely taken by surprise, completely shocked by what happened to them on Saturday morning. Authorities in Israel are saying that potentially around 100 civilians and soldiers have been taken hostage by the Hamas gunmen on Saturday, and many of them would have been driven into Gaza, where they're now being held by Hamas in various areas. And let's bring you the live picture now of Gaza. It looks pretty quiet now, but it has been a very, very difficult night for Palestinians living within the Gaza city, mainly because, of course, the IDS has been sending its air missiles pretty continuously through the day and through the night onto Gaza City as well. In the last few minutes, we've had a few lines from the Israeli Defence Force. They are saying that sirens are now sounding in Jerusalem and across Israel as more rockets have been fired from Gaza. We've also heard from an IDS spokesman that the military has now regained control of all communities near the Gaza barrier, but isolated clashes are still ongoing with active Palestinian gunmen. As always, you can get the very latest on the BBC's website, but I am back here in a few minutes' time with more on this developing story. Stay with us on BBC News. This is BBC News. I'm Maryam Moshiri. The latest headlines. The Israeli military deploys dozens of tanks towards Gaza and calls up 100,000 reservists as prospects of a ground offensive in Gaza mount. It's thought more than 700 Israelis have been killed. 260 were at a music festival which came under attack from Hamas. Israeli officials have described Saturday's attacks as their 9/11. 100 Israelis have reportedly been taken hostage and moved to Gaza.
Don't hurt little children, don't hurt women. If you want me instead, I'm willing to come.
Let's take you now to Gaza City, and I just wanted to bring this shot back into focus because I don't know if you can see that. Look at that massive plume of smoke there. This has happened in the last few minutes. Another Israeli Defence Force strike on the city. We've been hearing about the number of dead in Israel, but also we've been hearing about the number of those who've died in the Palestinian Gaza City. And we know now from the Defence for Children International Palestine, it's a non-profit organisation, it said that 33 Palestinian children have been killed in Gaza since Saturday morning. That on top of over 400 Palestinians who have lost their lives since the Hamas militant attack on Saturday morning and the retaliatory strikes by the Israeli Defence Force. You can hear, I think, the muezzin in the background as well. 2.2 million people live in this territory. It's a tiny strip. It's not very big. It's 140 square miles of very densely populated territory. So you can imagine any military strike is going to have an impact not only on that specific target, and Israel is saying it's targeting Hamas targets, but also on the areas around it. So this is the situation in Gaza right now. Well, that's what's happening in Gaza. I think, we'll leave that live shot because there has been some movement over the last minute or so. But in the meantime, let me tell you about what's happening in southern communities, because Israel has said now that it's regaining control of all of those southern communities in the Israeli territory attacked by Palestinian Hamas gunmen, though isolated pockets of fighting do still remain. Well, it's now more than 48 hours since the mass assault by Hamas. Israel's army says it will secure breaches in the Gaza separation barrier. You remember they were bulldozed through by militants because they are worried that militant fighters might still be using it. Well, military officials say warplanes, helicopters and artillery struck more than 500 targets in Gaza overnight. Hamas militants remain inside Israel, and as we heard earlier, there is some fighting going on in various areas. Reservists have been called up as well in Israel, around 100,000. These pictures show the Israeli military deploying tanks towards Gaza. They were shot by a BBC News crew on Sunday evening. Dozens of armoured vehicles carrying troops were also seen in the area during the day. Well, Palestinians are preparing themselves for a possible ground invasion. Our correspondent Jonathan Beale is just a few kilometres from the border with Gaza and sent us this update. In the meantime, Hamas says it's fired a further barrage of missiles, targeting in particular Ben Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv and also Ashkelon. Well, several airlines have suspended services to Tel Aviv, including 3 US carriers, Air France, Lufthansa and Emirates. But some evacuation flights have left that airport. Hungary and Poland have transported 300 of their nationals on board 3 separate aircraft. The Nepalese government is expected to meet to discuss how best to evacuate its nationals, at least 10 of whom were killed in Saturday's attack. Other countries are thought to be making similar preparations. Well, let's get more reaction now to the events of the past few days. I spoke earlier to Sir Ephraim Mervis, the UK's chief rabbi. In the meantime, we are also hearing from the Israeli military that just outside of Gaza, the fighting that was going on in southern Israel, well, that has now resulted in the control of communities near the barrier being regained by Israel. We heard there that there was worry that in the southern Israeli area, at least, there were still militants on the loose. If you want more information on what you've been watching here on BBC News, you're stepping away from the television, you're more than welcome to go to the BBC's live page. It is brilliant. It's updated minute by minute by correspondents and reporters on the ground and, of course, journalists here in London. For now, though, do stay with me here on BBC News. I'm back at the top of the hour. Stay with us. Live from London, you're watching BBC News. Israel's defence minister orders a total blockade on the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip, cutting off water, food and power. He says Israel is fighting a beastly people. More than 700 Israelis are feared dead, 260 killed at a music festival attacked by Hamas. Israeli officials describe it as their 9/11. Hamas militants reportedly take 100 Israelis hostage and move them to Gaza.
Don't hurt little children, don't hurt women. If you want me instead, I'm willing to come.
This is the scene live in Gaza, where airstrikes have killed nearly 500 Palestinians, 33 of them children. Israel's Prime Minister warns of a long war ahead. Showing its support, the US says it's moving warships closer to Israel. Hello, a very warm welcome to BBC News. I'm Maryam Moshiri. In the past few minutes, Israel's defence minister has said he's ordered a total blockade of Gaza. Now, that includes a ban on admitting food, water and fuel. Yoav Gallant said this was part of a battle against what he described as beastly people. Israel also says its forces have regained control of all southern communities in Israeli territory attacked by Palestinian Hamas militants, though isolated pockets of fighters could still remain. It's now more than 48 hours since the mass assault by Hamas. The Israeli army says it will secure breaches in the Gaza separation barrier that militants may still be using. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. Let's bring you some more news now coming into us from Gaza City. The live pictures show you how the situation is unfolding there. There are, as you can see, thick black clouds of smoke after the Israeli military targeted what it calls Hamas targets within the city. We've had a few lines in the last few minutes. Firstly, Hamas has said that 4 Israeli captives and their Hamas captors have been killed in Israeli airstrikes on the Palestinian enclave since Sunday. Now, as we have been hearing, we think around 100 hostages have been taken, both civilian and military, by Hamas militants into Gaza. And the danger, of course, is that with Gaza being bombed like this, being sent air missiles from the Israeli military in this way, there is a danger that injuries and deaths could happen. The spokesperson for Hamas has said the bombardment overnight and today on the Gaza Strip led to the killing of 4 of the enemy's captives and their captors. That's from Abu Ubaida, a spokesman for Hamas's armed wing. We'll bring you more on that story as and when we get it here on BBC News. Now you're live with me, Maryam Moshiri, watching BBC News. Now let's take a little bit of stock now about what is happening and what the wider implications are for the Middle East region. I want to bring in Dr. Tobias Bock, a senior research fellow for Middle East Security Studies at Chatham House. Dr. Bock, it's very, very good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. What's your assessment of what's happening now? That was Dr. Hamad talking to my colleague there. Coming up this hour is the business news in a few minutes' time, but also we'll be hearing from Michal Cohen-Sargi. Her mother-in-law, Ada, is missing and is feared to have been kidnapped by Hamas. We'll be hearing from her, but do stay with us on BBC News. Now, before we go, let me just take you very quickly live to the Gaza Strip. These pictures coming into us show you the plumes of smoke once again in the background. And the biggest line we're getting now in the last hour or so is that the Israeli Defence Minister has declared a full blockade on the Gaza Strip. We'll have more information on what that means for the 2.2 million people living there in a few minutes' time. Stay with us.
Now on BBC News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
Oil prices rise and markets around the world are on edge in reaction to the crisis in the Middle East. Meanwhile, airlines cancel flights to and from Israel as the attacks continue. Hello to you, welcome along. This is a briefer look at the business stories from around the world. We'll focus on events in the Middle East and the impact right around the world. And we will start with that because the ongoing crisis in Israel and Gaza means we're seeing some impact on markets and economies more widely. The price of oil is up by 4% to more than $88 a barrel for Brent. Now, of course, neither Israel nor the Gaza Strip are big oil producers, but the conflict is taking place pretty close to what is a key oil producing and exporting region. Meanwhile, Israel's central bank has moved to stabilise markets, announcing it will sell up to $30 billion of foreign currency in a bid to stabilise the shekel. So let's speak now to Nitesh Shah, who's head of commodities and macroeconomic research at Wisdom Tree. And Nitesh, it's good to have you with us. Just talk to us first of all about what reaction we're seeing, not in Israel or indeed in the Gaza Strip, but right around the world as this contagion spreads. Just want to show you some market numbers, and it often seems crass to talk about things like this at times like this, but it is important for the effect that this has right around the world. You can see Brent crude, that rising up, as we were saying, up more than 3% today at $87.29. It's been around $80. It's been falling a little lately, but that nervousness about security of supply. Let me show you overnight what happened in Asia and the United States if I can, and that's the picture there. Markets really just trying to work out right now what all of this means and whether the contagion could spread. We'll keep you right up to date, but we'll bring you more now on the ongoing situation in the Middle East. You're watching BBC News.
Never miss a story. Get the headlines as they happen. And watch BBC News live wherever you are. Download the BBC News app.
You're watching BBC News. I'm Maryam Moshiri. Let's go back now to our top story. Around 100 hostages have been taken from Israel, and it's believed that many of them have been taken to Gaza by Hamas. Most were taken from villages and towns close to the Gaza border in southern Israel. A little earlier, I spoke to Michal Cohen-Seiji. Her mother-in-law, Ada, is one of those missing. Well, that was Michal, whose mother-in-law, Ada, is still missing. And you're seeing live pictures now from Ashkelon in southern Israel, where the Israeli military is very clearly mobilising. It's not far from the border with Gaza. We heard earlier on from the Israeli military that some of those southern communities have been regained control-wise by the military there. There is talk now potentially of some sort of ground assault on Gaza. But again, it's very difficult to know what is going to happen and when that is going to happen. But one thing that is very, very clear is that this conflict is extremely complicated, and it's difficult to explain to people exactly what is happening. Let's cross live now to someone who I think can help with all the questions that people have been searching for online and indeed sending us here at the BBC. Our Middle East editor, Sebastian Usher, is in the newsroom, very, very, very ready, as always, to help with questions, Sebastian. And I suppose that the first question that we need to ask you is, why is this happening at this moment in time? Sebastian, thank you very much indeed. Sebastian Usher there, giving a full explanation to all of those questions that you have been searching for online. I'm going to leave you now with these live pictures of what is happening in Gaza City right now. And as you can see there have been attacks ongoing over the last few hours. And the latest line we're getting now from Gaza's health ministry is that 511 people have been killed and 2,750 have been injured as a result of Israeli missile strikes on the Gaza Strip since Saturday. Israel says it is striking Hamas targets in Gaza. My colleague Lucy Hockings is here with the very latest at the top of the hour. Stay with us on BBC News.
Hello again. Over the weekend, we had a real contrast with the weather north to south. In Scotland, we had